Television Executive at Imagination Abu Dhabi, and I have the honor and the pleasure. I'm really excited to introduce our speaker of the session. Even though he does not need an introduction, I'm going to do so anyways. He is a director with an incredible eye for high stakes and authenticity. And before being a director, he came from the world of cinematography. And he's worked with the legendary Luc Besson and Thierry Arbogast. He's shot films like Transporter and Transporter 2, a few of the Taxi films, War, The Message, the story of Joan of Arc. And as a director, he's brought us the iconic film Taken, District 13, From Paris with Love, The Gunman, Peppermint, and many more. He's also shot in the UAE. He's also shot during the pandemic. So I think we're in very, very good hands, and we have the perfect speaker for this topic. So without further ado, please let me introduce Mr. Pierre Morell. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good. Hi, Talal. Nice to see you again. Hi, everybody. Assalamu alaikum to everybody. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for receiving.
Wa alaikum assalam.
It's actually been a real pleasure to be shooting. As you said, I shot in the UAE recently, so it's good to be back somehow, remotely, but back.
Well, thank you very much for your time being here. And in this session, as you know, we'll be talking about how the new normal from the ongoing pandemic could affect the way that culture gets portrayed in films, received in films, and how filmmakers will just deal and manage with culture in the movies that we see in the time to come. It could get deep.
I hope deeply in my mind, I hope that the pandemic will not change anything in our culture. It's not, it doesn't really disrupt anything in a way. It has disrupted many things last 18 months now almost. I hope the scar of this pandemic won't be too bad. It will actually bring us good things rather than bad things into our lives and culturally in general. But definitely we cannot ignore it. What I think is the good part of it is that for millenniums, since the mankind exists, basically, we very, very mostly have organized around the rivalry between the neighbor, the next tribe, the next nation, the next anything, because we had positioning ourselves as enemies rather than friends. And this year, at least, we've had one common enemy, and that was the virus. So that's right. I think in the long term, people will at least remember that, because that's probably the first time in humankind that we have one common enemy, one thing to fight all together. And hopefully in our lives, in society, in global international relationships, and in culture, that will resonate in the years to come.
Yeah, I think, like you said, it's the first time in history that we have had a common enemy. I think it's at least the first time in history where we've had a common enemy and we've been able to see each other react because of globalism and because of the way we can connect and communicate, how we all get affected the same.
Yeah, and fight it all in different ways, but each nation has taken a special path to fight it. But yes, there was common enemy and common grounds for fighting.
Yep. Well, I want to start by asking you a question that maybe is not so deep first, and that is, and then right. we'll get into the deeper ones as we go in. The first one is I think the big elephant in the room for me and for people I've spoken to recently is like masks and social distancing and the fact that there's a virus around. We've gotten used to now going outside our houses and only seeing people from the bridge of their nose up, and there are kids who are young enough to maybe not remember a time where you saw a whole face going out, 3-year-olds and younger kids. So filmmakers, how do you think filmmakers are going to approach that when thinking about reflecting real life or current life in films? When does that become a thing? And, how will that be?
Obviously, for now, everything that has been shot during pandemic or let's call it post-pandemic, what's being shot now, apart from a very specific subjects, are not directly related to the pandemic. TV shows probably, people who are taking place like now and who are depicting life now. People do wear masks all the time. I once again hope that in the months to come or years to come, wearing a mask in a movie will be linked to a bad memories of a period thing, and that
PTSD.
yeah, but I think it's just so much reductive of what human interaction can be. Most of our expressions are through language, obviously, but the body language and the facial expressions are so much part of our communication. It definitely is a massive handicap not to see your partners, your people you talk to, not seeing their faces. I can say the same thing like this and like this, and not going to get it the same way because maybe I'm not smiling underneath it. I am smiling right now, but maybe I was not. So I think it will be challenging. Will it be replaced? Once again, hopefully we'll be done with masks shortly. Maybe there will be another pandemic. Maybe some people will still fear there's another pandemic and they'll keep the mask anyway. People will react in different ways according to their different experiences, I'm sure. But I do think that I haven't absorbed it yet, but I'm sure that humans have probably compensated the lack of that part of communication by different body languages, by things that have altered the way they communicate. When words are not enough. I haven't noticed it. I haven't worked on it yet, but I'm sure it has changed the way we do communicate in very, very tiny ways. There's micro signs. Like that's what we do. That's what computers cannot do yet. You can make avatars and CGI creatures. The most complicated part for virtual creatures company is actually expressions, because the micro sign that human eye can detect in someone else's expression is very, very hard to replicate. So I'm sure we found other ways, but once again, hopefully that will be just the past.
Hopefully, I'm glad to hear that coming from you, and so thank you for reassuring us all.
Oh, but by the way, it's also which we experienced. I mean, you and I were shooting recently in the UAE, and I don't speak Arabic. I speak French because I was born in French. I speak English because I work with people who mostly work English, because so far in most of the world it is the common language. But I had to communicate on a daily basis with actors who some would speak a bit of English, some would speak only Arabic. And we had to wear masks between takes. And there was a lot that I could not transmit because they could not see my expressions. And when you talk to an actor, it is part of your communication. You need to express what you want, what you're looking for, and bypass the language. And
that's a challenge within a challenge.
It is. Yeah, it was a challenge because I wouldn't speak French. So I was always like hoping that nothing would get lost in translation, let's say. But on top of the translation, there was that lack of, as I said, the micro signs that we transmit without knowing.
Yeah,
I hope it worked, sir. I hope it worked.
I'm sure it did, because you always surround yourself with a vibe of friendliness, and you're part of the team, and so people know you, and there's other little small nuances that people understand from you. And I was going to ask you about working with actors from a different who speak a different language and come from a different culture. What is it like when because you obviously as a director are in charge of going through casting, choosing the actors that work for the roles. So you have to go through, meeting many people who you don't know, you don't have their background. And so you're just jumping in, looking at this, meeting all these people, picking the right ones, and then working with them and becoming a family with them. And you don't speak the same language, you don't have a common culture. There's a barrier of communication. I don't know if you felt, have you gone through this in other places, but what was that like in general here or in other places?
There's several layers of that. I think it's always interesting what attracts me to shooting elsewhere than what my original culture is actually trying to find, getting to know other cultures, also trying to find what is the common grounds. And I think what does help in communicating first is that from anywhere in the world, I've noticed that many times, wherever you are, wherever you come from, wherever the local culture is, what the language is, what is common is some universal values and feelings that are transcending culture. So when you listen to make it simple, give an example, when you listen to an audition or a take on a movie of an actor from whom you don't understand the language, you know what he's talking about because you got a script, but you don't hear the actual language, but you do hear the music. It's like a song. There's the music, there's the phrasing, and then there's the words. And even though I've noticed that even though you don't know the words, you do hear the music. And if it's right, you feel it. If it's not, you feel it. Because there's something in common. Like there's a way we position our voices, the expressions, the music of it all. So like, okay, this works or this doesn't. This feels cold or this feels heartfelt. This feels mean or this is nice. I mean, there's common things that I could not describe, but I'm sure some specialists have, or like what makes us understand feelings that are beyond what we express with words.
Yeah.
And that's what helped me communicate with those guys. I once again, I don't speak Arabic. They most of the time spoke a little bit of English, but not much. And I had to relay onto a translator to communicate exactly what I was saying and to give me back the feedback on what they understood and what the takes were. But I could always feel before that if it was right or not. And I think that is interesting to know and interesting to be culturally, because what we will, I think, live in coming years is, and that will lead us to what the bulk of this conversation is, like because of somehow globalization of communication, it makes it easier and easier and easier to communicate and to share different cultures. There will be a common ground that we will find. I think that makes people interested of what's happening on the other side of the world because they share the same experience or they share the same feelings or the same values, no matter what the culture itself is.
I'm surprised, like you've given me information that I didn't expect you to tell me. So thank you. You've added. Sometimes, when you ask a question, you kind of expect what the answer would be totally different. That's amazing. Yes. It's like a song. And,
It's a song.
It's a song. Yeah. That's amazing. I didn't think of it that way. I was going to, coming from image, if that also helps you transcend the challenges that language put, because you have an additional tool to look through.
That's a great question. I have no idea. I'm more instinctive than smart on that. So probably instinctively yes, maybe. But most of all, I think it's about just listening to what people are saying, and people give you information about what they like, what they feel comfortable with, and what they don't feel comfortable with, and which leads me to other things. Like when you decide or accept and want to make a movie which is taking place in another country which is not yours, when you didn't grow up with, you don't have even if you have a vague feeling of knowledge of what the culture is, but you don't have the actual real culture, the local culture, because it's made of very small details that you have to have learned from your childhood, basically. You need to ask for specific things, specific directions, because you have a feeling of what the movie or the scene or the take is all about. You still have to take into account what the local culture is going to respond to that. You need to still not try to impose the way you should say the line, but also accept and understand why it's not said the way you expect it to be. As you just said, I mean, you expect a response.
Yeah.
The sense is there. Maybe the response is slightly different. And that's from a cultural perspective. So I was always very, very paying much attention to what I was expected to hear, which I would have expected to hear from an American actor or a French actor, was not necessarily what I was going to hear from an Arabic-speaking actor. It's more so an Emirati-speaking actor. And you need to understand that maybe even though the music is right, sometimes leaving a sentence going up or going down will mean something different. So it's a tricky thing. It's very interesting, but it's once again so much more interesting that staying in your comfort zone and just working where you were born. I like learning from new people. I think it enriches everybody's experience. So and it will be more and more business-wise. There'll be more and more demand, I think, to create some content that will resonate for everybody, not just locally.
Yeah, I think there's been a shift in terms of the kind of content we watch globally. There's a time where you either watch content that is very relatable to you culturally, or you watch international spectacle. Mainly Hollywood films, or if you're the biggest industry that you look up to wherever you are in the world. But I've noticed recently, we've watched TV shows that are entirely in Spanish. Korean films are very popular. French films, Italian films. There's Arabic films. There's on Netflix and all these streaming services. We like to hear authenticity and language and actors from the right place. There's a time where if a film is being made in a country, all the different nationalities will be from the actors of that country pretending to be other nationalities. And for the ease of consumption, it's all in the same language. But that doesn't work anymore. Maybe the pandemic is acting kind of like a catalyst in that way. What do you think is the future for culture and film in that regards, in terms of consumption?
I think you're absolutely right. The revolution in the way we consume audiovisual products, movies, TV, whatever, has changed drastically. And yes, the emergence and never-ending climb of streaming platforms is changing that in a big way. I think the pandemic has enhanced or speeded up this, because people could not go out. They were on lockdown, they were in confinement, so they had to watch TV, and they were watching everything, and they had access to something they never had before of that magnitude by watching streamers. And you could access anything from anywhere. And it became the norm. That's the new norm. Local is global. I mean, what was so far produced locally for local audience is now being broadcasted everywhere, and it still seems to be very much working and interesting everybody else. So, what, as you said, was, when it comes to mainstream entertainment, was coming from Hollywood, let's say, and was in English. And even the supposedly English-speaking actors were still portrayed by English-speaking actors. That was somehow very fake, but we accepted it. Yeah. Was it being lazy? Was it just a tool of cultural imperialism? I don't know. I'm not going to go there. But this is over. People now, the audience is not what the Americans thought were. They're not lazy. They can read subtitles. And the music of the language is part of what is interesting. So even though you don't understand Russian or Arabic or Chinese or anything, when you have in the same movie or the same TV show people from different countries speaking their own language, and you just have to read the subtitles, it makes it so much more lively, so much more interesting. And that is going to change in a very big way, I think, in the coming years. It started here. Yes, the pandemic sped that up, but that's going to be the big revolution in the coming years, and that's fantastic.
Let's talk about Hollywood. You made very successful films in France, and it's very difficult for someone who's outside of Hollywood to break through and make it in Hollywood. But what positioned you to be able to cross over and become successful in an industry that has all these barriers eventually?
Mm-hmm. I was lucky. I mean, I'm sure it is extremely complex, because it was literally, once again, based on language. If you would not speak English, you would not be able to make movies in Hollywood. That was the nature of the beast. I don't think it was much more complicated shooting there, because what is fantastic on this, and probably is the case in every other industry, I don't know, but in the movie industry, what is actually amazing, and we experienced that together. We shot a movie in the UAE that was really big movie with a lot of people, a lot of technicians, and we had like 45 different nations on set with all 45 different cultures from the East, from the West, from everywhere, right? When you are on a movie set, everybody has one common culture, which is movie making culture. So even though you've never met a guy, 2 hours later, you communicate and you feel like you've been your best friend for 20 years, and you just ask for a thing which is movie related, and everybody gets it because culture is like left aside somehow. When I showed up in Hollywood and made movies in LA, it was the same. I was just a little Frenchie in the middle of like big Hollywood giants. After a few minutes, we just do the same job. So we share a common culture, which is the movie making culture, the movie technique culture. We have the same references, the same way of working, the same. There's minor little changes from one place to another due to labor laws or whatever you call it, but that's common ground. So it's not that complex. You just need to keep in mind that you are in a place, you don't have all the keys to a local culture. So you need to be very open to what people would bring you and not try to impose your perspective on things.
Interesting. I mean, I think you have, this is your career is, you've done this a lot. You come from France, you've directed American films, and it's different when you're the cinematographer or if you are a gaffer or but you're the director, you're telling the story. And you're a person from a different culture in another culture, and you're the one who's telling the story with the actors, and so that speaks a lot for the ability to
you need to be aware of where you're setting foot. I always use it. You need to know what you don't know, and what I used to say to studios when I was like having meetings with studio execs in USA is like, I'd love to work with you. Just don't ask me to make a movie about baseball. That was just an image. I have no idea what baseball is all about. There's no baseball in France. I never played baseball. I don't get the jokes about baseball, the who's on first base, and all this thing, which is like so subculture, but mainstream culture in America. I don't have the keys to that. So, and that was just an image. It's just like, it could be baseball or anything else. But if you want to go there, then you need to learn a lot to get all the tiny elements that makes it common knowledge, and I don't have that common knowledge. And if you ask me to do another movie in the UAE about, I don't know, camel racing or I don't know, anything, it's a stupid example.
Yeah,
I don't know the rules. Yeah. So I would have to learn those rules, or because if I don't, or if I just see my varnish of a culture that I have on those rules, I'll do something which is off, completely wrong, and people will not get it.
So it comes from also choosing the stories that you tell, and you're picking stories.
Yes, yeah.
You're picking stories that you know, and regardless if it's in the country,
that either I know or I find a common value that is universal that I know of.
So
and
speaking of,
that has to be the key, the main component of the movie.
Speaking of picking projects, when can you tell us how it felt or what your initial thoughts were when you were thinking of potentially shooting a film in the UAE?
Well, honestly, I'm not going to talk about the movie we just shot, so it's hard to give you an example about that. But this specific one, I could see a story that could have been taking place in other places with other characters in the same situation, and will end up in the same way with the same value, the same joy, the same pain, and the same dramatic moments, because it transcends that local culture. That's why I picked it, because that's what I saw in there, and I said, okay, it's a story I know about because it's a global issue. It's something I could do in another country with the same story. Why not try it in the UAE? Why not try it in the Arabic culture that I don't know of much? But I can see that this can resonate everywhere, because ultimately, once again, it's hard not to give you an example without talking about the movie itself. But you need to see something that is local but global.
Yeah, and after, now that you've gone through the process, do you feel like you were right about that feeling, the thought that it is
absolutely
resonate?
Absolutely, absolutely. I would do it again right away,
And
because whatever the complexity of the shoot and the communication issues we had or not, what I saw, I think, in the script is what I think worked in the movie. And when I see the response and the emotion that the actors gave me for a specific scene, is exactly what I saw. And that could have been Arabic, French, American, you name it. It works the same way.
so if you have the same movie and you've shot it twice or three times, and each time in a different language, do you think it will play differently?
Ultimately, no. That'd be very boring, though. Doing the thing over and over again, I would not do that. But I don't even do sequels to my own movies, so I might want to do the same thing again. I don't know, but I think there will be many details in the storytelling that would be different, but the outcome would be probably very close.
So shooting in the UAE and seeing that it is a melting pot of the UAE is a melting pot of cultures, and then that's also true within the film industry.
Mhm.
As you said, you were in a crew with people from all over the world.
Yeah.
Do you think that for films from the UAE to come, is that going to be something that will affect the identity of the kind of films and how it's made? Or
Well, that's something we need to be not wary of, but aware of. What comes with talking back to the streamers, the new platforms that provide us. What we need to observe and be careful of is that because those platforms are making decisions partly on algorithms that see what people like or don't like, we need to make sure that we keep that diversity of culture, and that we don't make it needs to be a tool to make things wider rather than to try to crunch everything into one single thought. So we need to keep on being careful to make it local, even though it has to be global. It's a different thought process. You can make local things with global values. If you go say, okay, let's make it global and then we'll set it somewhere, then you're losing the identity completely. So to keep the culture, variety of cultures, you need to be very aware of what you're doing. And I hope streamers, as I said, we're making decisions based on the algorithm and say, okay, this works, so this is the components we think we should have in the next movie or the next series or next this and this, that. Okay, that's reductive somehow. Because then those are things that do not compute in the algorithm will not have chance. So we need to still work on making something very, very original and very local and very specific to a culture and expand it to a global audience, I think.
You're leading me on to like 10 more questions that I want to ask based on what you just said.
I'm going to run out of time.
Yeah, we are. We're running out of time, unfortunately. But I wanted to just give you a chance in the end to just give us a little words of wisdom.
Gosh, I'm not wise enough to do that. Just
please do
it. No. Honestly, I don't. I wouldn't be able to do that. I just gave you a words of wisdom, which is let's keep on doing things that respect local cultures and give us on the other side of the world something that shows us what our culture is, and we can use global feelings, global values to do that. But we need to make sure this globalization of movie going or viewers or audience or platforms doesn't work the other way around.
I think I've noticed words of wisdom from you, and so I'll share what I've seen. I've seen you notice small things and realize that there might be this part of culture that is authentic, and we need to get it right. And those small details you've always focused on. And that's what I think, seeing you do that and then seeing how it plays is what brings things to life, is when you are true to a culture, you're true to a human, how they act and how they behave, because you can't separate a person from culture. Otherwise, we are computers or we are just robots.
The time will come soon enough.
Yeah. Well, I thank you very, very much for this. I've learned a lot. I've been thrilled having this conversation with you. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.
Everyone.
And thank you.